of Sigmar Kloster phase. Grab your hammer so we can clear a path through the Garys and forge our own narratives in the age of Nissa. Your allies through the Klosterverse this episode are...
Hi, I'm Paul. And Gary, I swear I'm not hitting you. I swear to Sigmar, I'm not hitting on you. But you are bringing sexy back because you keep bringing me to the chorus.
Okay. All right. These aren't going to make any sense, by the way.
Yeah.
Quite well.
Hi, I'm Will, and do you guys know why I need my own memoriam?
Why?
My what?
That's clever. That's a recent one. That's a new one. That's a new guy. And I'm Aaron, and these two other guys were the best zombies that I personally could raise. And in this episode, we'll chat with the Last Volari, a perfect assassin, truly the heart of the beast, Black Library author Gary Kloster. Hey, Gary, thanks for joining us. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, we're excited. So what brings you to the... I don't understand your thing, Paul. I'm sorry, we're going to pause for a second. What?
I don't get it at all.
All right. In Skaventide, one of the main characters' name is Chorus. Is that right?
Oh.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hope so, because the entire pun was based on it.
Okay, so that might be one of those things where, like, I read it and pronounced it in my head differently than intended.
Sure.
Like, I don't get
it. So what we've got here today is yet another of our Black Library author interview series. And we've got, hey, guys, we got a new Age of Sigmar edition coming out. And with those editions comes a titular Black Librarian novel, and so we had to jump in and learn quite a bit about it because I know everybody else wants to know about it too. And so we had to bring Gary on here to talk to us about it. So we're super excited. Normally I would say to read it because normally we do these interviews before the book comes out, but unfortunately we couldn't keep Paul from cracking it open, or I guess even Will from cracking it open either. So they're gonna have to pretend like they haven't read it yet. I'm a purist. I haven't opened it yet, but I will. But we're going to talk about Skaventide. We're going to talk about Gary as a person, as an author, et cetera, and I'm really excited to get into all of these things. Do you guys have anything you want to bring up before we dive into some questions? Any questions yourselves? Things, topics to broach?
My questions are for Gary, so...
Yeah, I don't have anything for you, Aaron, unfortunately.
Actually, I know what I was going to say. That was your best intro ever, Aaron. I loved it.
That can't be true. I've had some really good ones. What are you talking about? It's my favorite part that she's just good at like doing nightmares, I suppose, and not zombies. I don't know. I'm a fan. All right. Well, very cool. We're talking a lot, and we're not hearing a lot of Gary. So we got to turn the camera around. Gary, where do we start? We often talk about how you got your start in Warhammer. And so I'd love to hear about it. How'd you broach into the hobby? What games did you start playing? How long ago? Paint me a picture. Tell me a story. I hear you're good at that.
Yeah, hopefully. Well, this is a long time ago. I had to think about this. So back in high school in the 80s, I'm old. I had a friend. We played a lot of games together, and he went out to one of the local hobby stores. It was called Tomorrow's Yesterday. Great place that's long since gone. And he came back with this game called, Warhammer 40K. We'd never heard of it. This was 1987. I think it was first edition. He brings it out, and it was like, he didn't even have the proper copy. They'd like sold out or something. So they copied it was like this in a binder, it was all kind of kludged together. But he had the figures and that. So I remember we were sitting there on the floor playing with the little space marines with the beaky helmets and the orcs, like shooting at each other through like our little piles of moss we made. So that was my first introduction. We actually didn't do that a lot. We ended up, because at the time there wasn't a lot of figures and none of us were really big painters at that time. What we did end up playing a lot was Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. I really liked that. That was fun. Even though like everyone died all the time, it had all these fatal crits and things. But we had fun with that. And then we also ended up playing Space Hulk, came out towards the end of my high school, and we played that a few times and had a lot of fun. Then when I went to college, I did more of the miniature stuff because I ran into some people that had armies and things and could actually properly play the game. And that was pretty much all 40K. I don't even, none of them did the fantasy side. But
Normally that's where I would boo, but like I'm trying to be mature and professional about it, so I'm not going to.
We played a little Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay in college, and then along with so many other games, and then a little Space Hulk, a little I forgot the name of the board game. What's the big board game? Was the had all this things?
Hero Quest?
Yes, Hero Quest.
Okay.
We played that. So did a lot of that, and then I ended up running a game which was set in the Warhammer 40k universe. We did not use like the Rogue Trader, I think or anything like that. We kind of made up our own rules, and that
fun.
Did a thing there, just set in that universe, which was a lot of fun. So that was kind of my main introduction to it, and then got out of college, had kids, had jobs. Role-playing gaming went down a lot. Like, you know,
yeah,
you know how it goes. And then, so I really didn't do a lot with Warhammer until basically they approached me and said, "Hey, would you like to write for us?" And I started getting back into it.
Okay,
nice.
And so it sounds like interesting. So it sounds like that. So they approached you, and I'm going to admit I'm a little ignorant to maybe your wider body of work. Were you writing presumably non-Warhammer stuff ahead of time, and that's how they knew to reach out to you?
Yeah, what happened was I started doing a lot of short fiction. I was the stay-at-home dad, and so I was at home with the kids, and our first kid liked to have naps, and basically as a thing to do, I started writing. It was something I'd always been kind of interested in, and then kind of stopped for a while, then I started again, and then I got kind of serious about it, so I started sending things out, and eventually they started getting bought, and and I ended up having a bunch of short stories mostly. And one of those short stories, a friend of mine, Maurice Brodus, he worked at Apex Magazine for their reprints, and I'd had this story printed elsewhere, but it didn't get a lot of attention. And so he asked if I had anything for reprint, a story that appeared somewhere else, and then you do it again, And it was a story called Riding the Signal, which was kind of a Alien, but with drones instead of aliens, people being stalked by this little mechanical, horrible killing monkey thing in their hideout. And it was a story with a lot of action in it, as you could guess. And apparently, I got to check a name here. Richard Garton was the editor. He was the submissions editor at the time at Warhammer. And he emailed me and said, "Hey, I really like this story. I really liked how you wrote action. Would you be maybe interested in writing for Black Library?" And I was like, well, yes, But it was kind of an interesting thing. This was, it's going to be kind of a theme, unfortunately, but I was in the hospital at the time. Not me personally, but my wife was in the hospital. She had unfortunately had a stroke, like a week or so before, and I got this email, and I'm like, "Yes, I'm interested. However, I'm a little busy at the moment." I'm like literally sitting in the ICU, and I'm like, "Can I get back to you?" And he's like, "Sure, of course." And yeah, so it ended up being like months later by the time things were settled medically. She's doing much better now, but
that's good.
It was a very scary time. So, she ended up being fine. But yeah, I have these memories of me sitting around in the ICU next to her bed, reading Warhammer lore and going through all the things. Because like I said, I've been playing with this stuff in the 80s and 90s, and come back to it in the late, 2018. And I'm like, wow. There's more stuff.
Who knew? Yeah.
What's this Age of Sigmar thing?
Sure.
Right.
Actually, so that normally is kind of a question we ask later, but I'm going to bring it up now because you kind of what did the catch-up process kind of look like for you? How did you go about trying to cram in however many years that was worth of history or backstory to sort of catch up to get ready to actually write something for Black Library?
I mean, thank God for the internet and wikis.
Yeah,
going through a lot of those, reading that, and then reading through some of the books. Starting to get those off. and start reading through. I read through like Abnett's books and things like that, and getting caught up on things. So
Sure.
that was very helpful.
I imagine it's probably a little easier from the Age of Sigmar perspective, and that there's just that much less they have to like go through, I suppose. Because it's an Age of Sigmar podcast, I will ask: did any things that you read about Age of Sigmar stand out to you as sort of formative or particularly informative, I suppose, to sort of get you, I don't know, inspired to write in the Mortal Realm setting?
I don't think anything in particular. I mean, I like the setting. I like the fact that it was, like ridiculously high fantasy, like not just, I was used to, again, I spent a lot of time playing Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, and that kind of, the old world was much more this sort of, even with Chaos in it, was still more of the low magic Tolkien-y, lots of people walking around hitting each other with swords, not so much the spells, things like that, even though you might occasionally run into a demon or something. But Age of Sigmar was very much the magic. Magic is everywhere. Magic is everything. This world is very different than what you would expect. And you could do almost anything in it. So I like that.
Sure. Okay. Do you find, man, I normally have like a script and I'm going off script, and I normally yell at the guys for going off script, or I'm breaking my own rules.
How dare you?
I know, right? So you mentioned that you can do almost anything in the Age of Sigmar, and it sounds like you like that. Do you ever find it, paralyzing is probably too strong a word, but when faced with the ability to do anything, does it maybe in some ways make it harder to write because you could do anything, right? I don't know if that affects how you approach things at all.
It does affect some things. I mean, I've noticed that I talk about the fact that, I love the fact that in Age of Sigmar, you can do all of these things, have all of these huge magical things. And yet a lot of the writing I've done in Sigmar so far has not exactly had that. My first novel, Last Volari, like the landscape is very much, there's not like, even though it's an Akshi, everything's not on fire all the time. There's not, like there's volcanoes and things, but it could be a fairly normal setting, for all the vampires and running around. So I like the fact that there is that possibility, but I don't want to hammer it too much. I don't want to have every scene be like something huge and enormous, like bizarre and that, because I kind of like to keep it a little grounded,
Yeah, sure. Well, and it's nice to have that grounded element in amidst the wild, untamed nature of the setting. Before I force us to get back on track, because I always do, but I'll since we're on this thread, I'll ask you guys, or these two, hey, you guys got questions along these veins before we get back to the regularly scheduled programming?
I did have a question. So it sounds like for you, Warhammer, Age of Sigmar, etc., especially when you share that story about your wife being in the ICU, is a little bit of an escapism or something that like you kind of get to exist in outside of reality at times. Is that a fair thing to say?
Yeah. Especially, I mean, that particular circumstance, yes, was a very nice, it was a very strange circumstance because here I am in this horrible situation going on, because literally when it happened, there was about 3 weeks where she was very out of it and very, when you see people on the movies or that, when they have something happen, they go into a coma, they're like, they're quietly, oh, okay. She was basically like in almost like a fever dream the whole time. So sort of talking, occasionally doing stuff. I spent a lot of time wrestling with her so she didn't pull out her tubes because she kept trying to do that, and then she'd kind of settle, and then I'd be sitting there reading about elves, and like orcs and ogres, and it was something. I mean, it was a trying time, and like I said, thankfully she came out of it. It was a very strange, like I walked in one morning, a friend of mine had been watching her overnight, and I'm like, how's Bren? How's she doing? And they're like, she's back. And like, hi, how you doing? And I'm like, what? So yeah. But yeah, it was a good way. I mean, it was very strange, but it was a good way. It was like, here's something else to focus on. Here's something else to read about and think about that isn't like the horrible stuff that's happening right at the moment, Yeah.
So as somebody who uses Age of Sigmar as escapism, right? it's very interesting to me that your writing is very realistic and low fantasy. Like, do you have like an idea as to why that is, or is that just kind of the way it works with the stories that you've come up with?
I think it's more just kind of the way it works, like I hadn't really set out with any intention, like, oh, I want to really make this more lore fantasy for Age of Sigmar or anything like that. It's just, that's what I wrote. And it's like, oh, okay, well, this is how this seems to be happening,
With kind of like on that note, especially because we were talking about Nissa Volari and the Last Volari, there's something about that book that I really enjoy, and it's that it's a lot of things that don't like exist in the models of Age of Sigmar necessarily, but it is purely Age of Sigmar. Like you said, like, oh, it's not that high fantasy outside of the, all the vampires, and it's an Akshi, but the idea of like, oh yeah, vampires and Akshi, of course they would live under an eternal blanket of ash clouds. It just is something that, we haven't seen before, but it makes perfect sense within the setting. And then the main sort of antagonist of that book isn't something we've seen. Like, there's not a model for that guy, but he very much fits in that setting. So what was like that like process of creating something that is unique to your stories outside of the setting, but fits perfectly in the setting itself? I don't know if that's a convoluted question.
Yeah, you're trying to marry like your idea of these characters and then into what the setting is. And like in this case, Last Volari, you have a group of vampires that have been cut off from the Crimson Keep. It's sort of abandoned, and most of the people that were with them die. The other vampires just died because of the curse. They somehow survived. And they're there, and it's like, well, what are we going to do? How are we going to live here? And it's like, let's find a good spot to do it, and let's just conquer everything, I guess. Just what else are we going to do? So yeah, it just kind of fit. And I wanted to set up. When I was doing this, I was speaking to the editors. We're kind of going back and forth ideas, and we liked the idea of this kind of long war where you had just this kind of grinding, decades-long battle between the forces of death and the forces of order, because like so much of the time in Age of Sigmar, there's this big, like, here's this big clandestine battle, like this thing going on, but there have to be all of these little wars going on all the time where you've just got people going back and forth and it's never settled, and we kind of wanted to portray something like that.
Well, literally never settled because you're dealing with vampires, right? These aren't things that have like lifespans or your traditional lifespan anyways.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's cool. I have a section just labeled the Nissa Volari section. So this can be the Nissa Volari section. So if you guys have other related questions, by all means, dive into them.
Yep. So my son has actually my oldest has already read the novel as well. And he had a question. I'm going to kind of couch a little bit. And his question was, where did you come up with the idea of the curse? And like, so part of that's in the fiction itself, but like the idea that they would live for a while, like they would, I don't know, dwindle, like, is a really cool idea that is not from AOS lore, and it's something that you came up with. And so, like, where did that idea come from of this long, drawn-out, everything is kind of unpredictable, but that there's this, like, final thing that's going to happen? Where did that come from?
It kind of came from the need for the story. Because if we're going to have this idea of this group of vampires that's isolated from the keep. And I'm not, you'll have to excuse me because part of the curse of doing this and doing a bunch of writing in different realms is I'm trying madly to remember the name of that vampire clan, which I write all the time and I can't. That particular dynasty.
The Castelli dynasty?
Thank you.
Yeah,
Castelli. I kept wanting to call them like Castilians or that, but Castelli.
Same principle.
It's so hard. I'm bouncing back and forth between, because I was doing 40K and then this and then other areas of Sigmar, and it's sort of like, okay, what's the name? Yeah, okay. The Castelli, when the lore is basically, that the prince is bound there to that keep. And then like the rest of his forces, it's kind of loose about like, oh, they're bound there too. And I'm like, well, if we're going to have them survive, then we wanted to have it be this kind of uncertainty. One of the things with the vampires is that normally writing them might be problematic because it's sort of like, well, they live forever. Even if you kill them, even if you like destroy them, they sometimes just come back, So having it be this thing where there's this threat, like they've heard about this curse their entire existence. They saw people like they were traveling with in their same group die of that curse. They're still around. They don't know why. Like there's this kind of uncertainty. And so they kind of have this sword hanging over their head and they don't understand it. And that ends up lending to the plot, the whole, like it makes them a little more mortal in a way.
Honestly, one of my favorite parts of the whole concept really is that I feel like the Castelli dynasty doesn't get much of, I don't know, they're not front and center as much these days, I would say, for the Soul Blight. I feel like there's newer, from a model perspective anyways, like a newer and fancier ranges and things, right? And I imagine they probably get a lot of attention, but this is a component that probably doesn't get as many words written or stories written about them. And it's nice to both have them be demonstrated, shown off, but also having a tweak or a unique take on even what is already sort of I don't know if it's a niche, but like a smaller subsection of a larger race or faction, which that's kind of one of my favorite parts.
I had a kind of a paired question. It's not necessarily a question, it's more of a comment from one of our Discord members, Darth Alec. He had read The Last Volari as well, and he had made the comment that it felt, and this is not meant as an insult, so please don't take this as an insult, but it felt like a young adult novel. The way that you had a young female protagonist and she was kind of coming into her own and understanding what it meant to be like her in the moment. And I kind of felt a resonation with that idea about the novel. What do you feel about that? Like, is that something you intended to do, or is that just kind of the way it came out?
Kind of. I mean, I'm not surprised by that because I was thinking that in some ways this had some thing. I mean, simply because it's, as you're saying, the character is young. I mean, she's 100 years old, and I specifically go into the fact that like one of the reasons she's the way she is that she was converted when she was very young and like when she was like a late teen, and that she's kind of stuck there. And this is one of the flaws the other vampires think of her, is that she's basically stuck, the eternal teenager, impulsive, not, and it wasn't so much me trying to make a young adult book. It was more I wanted to have like a character with flaws, and I wanted to have this powerful character who's sitting there trying to unite these other vampires. And she has her strength, she's very gifted in fighting and all of these things, but she has her flaws, and like that was a big part of it. And I don't know, like the character, like you develop these things out and it's kind of like, okay, here's the main character, here's what she does and things like that. And then as I'm just starting to write and work with, then it's suddenly like, oh yeah, she's a teenager. Okay, this is fun. So.
Did you ever find her, and this is, I don't know if the question even makes sense, but did you ever find her doing things that surprised you, which is absurd, right? Because you're the author, but did you hear her reacting to things that you hadn't taken into account and then having to follow whatever that, that direction led off into?
Not too much. I know there's other writers who talk about that happening a lot. And for me, it kind of happens, but it's a little more organic and it's a little slower. So like I did not start this out with her being like teenage 100-year-old vampire. That kind of slowly crept up on me, but there wasn't a lot of, like I'm surprised that she's doing it this way. Okay, let's go with it, because kind of once I got that conceit, then things kind of fell in line, that makes sense.
So I feel like this is the perfect time for one of my recurring questions.
I knew it immediately.
Yes, he asks the question a lot.
Yeah. Are you a plotter or are you a pantser?
I listened to some of your other interviews, so I was expecting this one. The thing is, I've thought about this a lot anyway, just because it's something that comes up with a lot of writers and they'll ask each other this. And my weird heretical view is that we're all really the same. And it's kind of like that this idea, because when I started out writing, I thought of myself very much as a pantser. I would just write stuff down and see where it went, whatever. And then when I started, especially doing like work for hire type thing, like things for like Games Workshop and stuff, like you have to tell them what you're going to do. They won't let you just be like, I'll do something, like, so you have to like give them outlines, things like that. But my realization was more that I work these things out in my head. And the main difference between sort of plotting and pantsing is like, when did I start writing it down? If I sat there and thought about it in my head for a long time before I started writing it down, that seems like pantsing. If I start writing it down and as I'm thinking about it, that's plotting. It's like, it's really about the same. It's just, when do I start typing?
Where in the timeline do your fingers touch keys? Yeah, sure. Other Nissa Volari related questions?
Yeah, just in the Last Volari, you've got those weird little dudes. I think I'm pronouncing it correctly. The Graz or the Grats, the little guys that live in the Broken Plains that one of the vampire clans are feeding off of. What was the impetus for creating those weird little dudes? Because they're not like one of the existing Age of Sigmar races, which one of our listeners, Sage Mud 14, is going to ask. What are they? Are they ghouls? But more of, I just thought of like, what was the impetus for you for making them?
For me, for making them, so there's a couple of things. And one was I was trying to come up with a good reason for like, there was the one vampire that controlled that Split Rock hold, and her whole thing. Hopefully not. The book's been out for a few years, so I'm not too worried about
spoilers
a whole lot. But like her thing was she was going to withdraw in there and just like wait out this whole fight and not, and it's sort of like, well, how's she going to do that? She needs blood. And it's like, I'll come up with this idea of a blood source for her. And then there's this kind of thing where this is probably a little bit more of the like things that come up, and things that you don't expect. I start coming up with these little Morlock things and developing them more and more. And then I was like, I got to cut back on this because this book is not about them, like,
yeah, right.
They get cut back. And it's one of these things where I like to leave little hooks in things. And so it's sort of like, maybe someday we'll come back and those things will be important and that'll be a thing. Maybe not, it'll never get mentioned again, but, and this is one of the things where the Age of Sigmar being so big, and that the fact that there might be some weird race of subterranean creatures living under some parts of it that are like devolved, like whatever they are, like, okay, there's teleporting mountains, there's giant beasts, there's like, that's pretty minor, like, okay, this place has chud. Sure. Okay. Like, like,
I just assume every square inch of the mortal realms has some weird creature living underneath it.
Yeah. So you're not announcing your next book is going to be all about the Graz, but you're not saying that it's off the table.
Exactly. I mean, it could be, like people may demand here.
Well, we'll start the demand right
now.
I'll
do it.
Yeah.
I had a kind of follow-up question. This is probably my final question on this topic because I really like it, but I also want to talk about your other stuff.
The main reason we're talking is a different book entirely, but go ahead.
Yeah, right.
So a very important part of Nissa's character is that her mother, as in her like assumed mother in the novel, is dead. But in the prequel, her mother is alive, if I'm not mistaken. And so it's kind of a two-part question. Number one, did the characters live in your head? And did you write the sequel, or did you write the novel first or the prequel first? And then number two, when you write Nissa, is her mother dead or is her mother alive? Does that make sense?
I think so. The first one's easy because I wrote the novel first and then the prequel second, because I wrote the novel and they just said, these are great. Here, why don't you write the stories as prequels? I'm like, okay. Like,
sure.
Focusing on the whole mother thing because that was sort of a weird thing. And again, kind of talking like when you asked about like, oh, do things just happen? Like the mom kind of just happened. That was the thing that just sort of like, I'm starting off the book and I'm like writing along and I'm like, oh, it'd be nice if she had somebody that was nagging, because I have this sort of teenage character doing crazy things. And it's like, wouldn't it be nice if I had a more responsible character nagging at her? But how do I do this? Well, like, how about her dead mother is in her head? Okay, sure.
Yeah.
And again, just ignore that sort of thing. And it's sort of like she doesn't even realize, like, is she a ghost? And is this weird? What's going on? It's like, like, So that was kind of how she started. Now I'm trying to figure out the second part. Sorry, what was it again?
Is Nissa's mother alive or dead in the character's head in your mind? Like when you were writing for the mother, was the mother dead and you were like recreating what the live mother would be, or is the mother always alive and you just kind of imagine what the dead mother would be like?
I would probably say the first, that in her head that she thinks of, like her mom was dead. It was a lot. The person she calls mother, because obviously vampire is not really her mother, but the person she's calling that died. And then this voice started up in her head later and became more and more coherent, and so her assumption is, oh, this is her coming back somehow, in my head inconveniently. Like,
That's fun. All right, neat. Does that wrap up our Volari section? And let's get to what the people want to hear about. Thanks, listeners, for sticking with us. Or honestly, hopefully you pause here, go read all the Volari books, and then we can come back and talk about Skaventide. Okay, all right, the new one. We're excited. First things first, I'd love to know, how did this story even come to be? Especially considering it's one of those new edition banner books coming out. Did they approach you? Did you approach them? Talk me through how it even was conceived of.
This has been so most of my work with the Black Library, like I said, they approached me as the editor, and since then it's been pretty much a like I wrote when I finally got back to them about, yes, I do want to write for you. Is this still available? They're like, sure. And they had me pitch a story, which my first story for them was a Necromunda story, which I basically picked because that was a small area, like in this all giant sprawling, like Age of Sigmar, Warhammer 40K, all this. Like, okay, here's like under one of the. I mean, yeah, it's a giant hive city, but it's like one little area. I can, So I did that, and then pretty much after that, a lot of it was like, could you write us a story about this? Sure. Could you write us a story about that? Sure. And I just bing, bing, bing. I'd finish one. They'd say, okay, here's the next. And then eventually they were like, could you write us a book? And actually the first book was going to probably be something Necromunda-y, except then right as we were getting ready to start talking about it, COVID hit. And all of their schedules, all of their things got messed up. And they're like, hold on. And then that's when they came back to me and said, what about vampires? Okay. So yeah, I did this a book for them. And the editor on that one, I was working with Hannah Hughes and Jacob Youngs. They were the big fantasy editors at the time. Hannah still is. I think Jacob has been moved around some. But Jacob really liked Nissa. And he really liked Last Volari, and he was talking it up. So when Skaventide came along, they approached me and said, we really like what you did with that. Would you want to try, we've got a big project coming out. Do you want to work on it? I'm like, of course. So that's pretty much how it happened. We ended up, they had some ideas of what they wanted, that were pretty, vague, but, it was a lot of the sort of the basic plot. And then I expanded on it.
True. Was it at all intimidating knowing that it was going to be sort of the tie-in for the new edition? Did that thought cross your mind at all, or was it just another book to write?
I mean, yes and no. It was intimidating in that, they're giving me the information that they have for what's because they're also doing all of the other stuff for Skaventide. And they gave me what the information they had, but they were still working on that because they had to give it to me to be able to finish the book, to be on time to come out with box and everything. So they were still like, they're like, here's some information. And every once in a while I'll get like, here's some more information. Okay. Like, I mean, there were things like, some of the names of some of the like groups in the book and that, like they, like the Memorians, I can't even remember what the first names they gave me for those characters were. But it was something else, and then it changed, and then like I remember I turned the book in, and they're like, "This is great. We've done all the editing. By the way, we had to change a bunch of names, but we did that." I'm like, "Okay, like sure," because so like that's the thing. You're working. I'm working with this other group, but I'm in my little room all off of my own. Like getting emails, in the Midwest from England saying, "Oh, by the way," like, so that was definitely different, and a little bit, like intimidating at times. But I think we managed to stick fairly close,
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. You sort of confirm what I think a lot of us, in terms of like just the fans, always speculate, and that every once in a while, eagle-eyed readers will notice that something is called something a little different, and we always speculate, why is that? And I think often we come to the conclusion it's just because these are evolving works that are being but created in tandem with a bunch of other stuff, and things sort of slip through the cracks. And so I imagine that's probably what's happening, not uncommonly across all sorts of stuff that we read. So I'm going to take that as a confirmation that our guesses were correct.
You're right, Aaron.
Yeah, no, it wasn't even me. I know others speculate that that's the case.
I have nothing. I say nothing except for what I happen to work on, and even then,
No, but it seems to be an untroubling trend. It doesn't matter in the long run. But
I have a follow-up question to that. Were you able to see any of the models when you were writing the story?
Yeah.
No?
I got to see most of the good guy side, depending on who you regard as good in this. But I got to see like the Night Questor, some of the all of those guys.
Nice.
I got sent pictures in encrypted files with lots of warnings, like "Do not release this." Like. That was if you talk about intimidating, I was just terrified. I clicked the wrong button and I posted this on Reddit. That's not going to happen, yet somehow my anxiety is like.
I'll admit my finger hovers over the post button every once in a while, just like, it's intrusive thoughts, right? What if I pulled the wheel and went to the median? What if I just clicked post and just let the chips fall where they may? Actually,
I don't know why they have a tweet button on the documents.
Yeah, why do they keep
it? So weird.
Their account. Yeah. So your answer actually leads into a listener question. I want to squeeze it in before we go elsewhere. We had listeners of the show chime in and add some questions because our creativity is limited. Selena, a sleepy mermaid, apparently, they ask, Amon Solus, the Night Questor in Skaventide's description, seems to match the design of the Night Questor model in the starter box very closely. Which was first, the character or the model's design? You might have already answered it, but go ahead.
Yeah, they sent me. That was one of the ones I saw, and I was like, okay, this makes this easy. I can describe what's this guy look like? Here it is. So that was kind of nice. I mean, I like making things up, but I also like sometimes it's just nice to have this. Especially the models are cool, so being able to just say here's this cool thing.
So that was actually kind of my follow-up question, and why I wanted to move on to the next story was that in The Last Volari, your characters are nothing necessarily to do with the models that are in the game. They're just kind of cool things you came up with and really interesting hooks that really brought an interesting dynamic story and plot to the world. And in this book, it's kind of the opposite, where you have these actual definite pieces of plastic that explain to you by their function, right, some of who they are, and then you get a little bit more details to understand how to do it. So which process do you prefer? Do you prefer having an actual picture of oh, this is my character? Or do you prefer having, I don't know, but it's going to be fun figuring out?
Mm-hmm. I like both. And the thing is, in this example, I had a lot of, there were models for a lot of these things, at least a lot of the, the Memorians and the chamber and that. But, a lot of the other things, the like the characters of Vora and things, I make them up, and then I get to do both, and it's kind of nice.
Yeah.
It's sometimes having limits is a good way to expand creativity, because it's sort of like, okay, I have to make sure that this goes with this, that goes along with this. But so I don't mind them. I mean, I don't mind, it would be annoying if like every character were detailed out, like it has to be exactly like this. It wasn't anything like that. It's just more like, here's a few of these models. And it's like, okay, awesome. And these, like I said, it really helps that the models are.
Will, do you got any questions before I steal it again?
Now I was going to go into talking a bit more about the Skaventide itself and the story, just so the listeners get the little.
That's what I was going to do. Go ahead.
The segue. Yeah. So for folks that are listening in and are thinking about getting Skaventide, welcome back, Paul. Just some basic little teasers. When does this story take place, like in the timeline of the Mortal Realms and the Age of Sigmar?
It takes place on like the whole timeline itself. Like I was listening to your guys' podcast, and I'm like, oh my god, these guys know a lot more about the Mortal Realms than I do. I'm trying to keep track while I'm writing, and it's like all these things are happening, but it's pretty close to whatever you would call like right now, like the stuff that's happening. This is sort of it was interesting because like the Last Volari books, I very carefully tried to keep them just sort of like they could be happening in any number of times. We haven't done anything to peg them down like, oh, this is happening right after this or before this. And that was intentional because I kind of wanted it to be like whenever it's its own little corner. Whereas this is a big thing that's happening world, part of a big thing. And kind of a like ripped from today's headlines in Age of Sigmar. This is what's happening right now, kind of. So yeah, this is like going along with the whole like the Skaven showing up, like busting through, and right at that kind of right after that moment, and suddenly the people in Akshi having to deal with that catastrophe.
Yeah. It kind of ties into a listener question from Sage Mutt, which is that many of your novels and shorts are kind of set in Akshi. Is this like a coincidence that just keeps on happening, or do you have a special fondness for the Realm of Fire?
I mean, it's one of these things where Akshi has a lot of detail, and so like that makes it a little easier. Some of the things like the Skaventide that had to take place there because of what's going on, so boom. Others just kind of happened, so I mean, Akshi is a nice setting. It's like some of the ones are a little like I'm not quite sure how to handle Hish. I'm not,
Do you have, sometimes this is a question we ask, though it's not on my list right now, so I'm going to ask it. Do you have a realm that you're looking forward to writing in? Like something that's on your to-do list, a realm that you want to spend some time in?
I've done a little bit in it, but I'm looking forward to doing a little bit more in Ulgu. Say it right, if I can, I like that place, the whole Realm of Shadows idea.
Was that your Harrow Deep story?
Yeah.
Okay.
Harrow Deep was there, and also I believe the Perfect Assassin was there, although that was...
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. Anyways, back to Skaventide. Keep going, Will, if you'd like.
Just next is, what should we know about the main characters going into the novel, kind of where we see them as the book starts?
I'm trying to think through, like, I want to do this... it's been out recently enough. I mean, I'm kind of glad that it's out, so I don't have to worry about like, oh, what do I say?
Right.
I've already seen like extensive YouTube breakdowns, so I'm not going to be, but I don't want to like completely ruin things.
Yeah.
The main characters, there's sort of 3 viewpoint characters, and one of them, Brevin Fortis, he's a Lord Ordinator of the Hollow Knights who has terrible things happen to him. It's pretty much his story, like as he's dealing with the Skaven incursion. And then the other 2 are the Knight Questor, Aemon, who I just really like because he's very much, I tried to imagine what a night quest store would be like, and there's this idea of the lone gunman from the Western going around writing things. But I also, like, one of my key inspirations from him was the guy who absolutely hated group projects in high school. Like, just always having to work with other people. Just wants to, like, give me an assignment, let me do it, stay out of my way. Like somebody who's like, he's very talented and they want him on their side, but he's also just a pain in the ass to work with. So you just go do something over there. And he's like, thank you, So,
I don't want to paint you with your own brush here, Gary, but do you feel like you resonate with that character a little bit?
Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, I think we all have had that situation where we're stuck with the group and you're just like, oh.
I was the group that people were stuck with, honestly.
And then, the last one, Savora, like, is my mortal character. And having her, I like having, like, the mortals, somebody, like, mixed into the group to have that viewpoint that isn't part of the big mover and shakers in the world. That's just somebody that's being dragged along and has to deal with it. And I like the fact that, especially, like, her being pulled into this, and she's also kind of my explanation character, my character that, like, they're all explaining, like, what is this thing? What is this, what is this chamber? What is going on here? And having her find out and having her be, like, not pleased by,
right.
like, was fun. So.
Sure. Actually, that not a question we had written down, but something I thought of it is that did you have to approach this book in any way that we were assuming that this might be the first entry point that some people might have into Age of Sigmar or the Mortal Realms? Like, given it's a new edition, this seems like it's a book that someone could pick up for the first time. Did you have to consider any of that, or is it just assumed that the reader has a baseline level of knowledge of Age of Sigmar?
I mean, my assumption is that most of the people that are reading this probably have read other Age of Sigmar or that, but I do try to keep it in mind that maybe not. And I want to be able to have them read it, and maybe every once in a while be like, who's this guy? Okay, whatever. But have that be a minor point, a blip, as opposed to, I don't understand anything that's going on here, So that if somebody does just pick it up and says, oh, this is a cool cover, Age of Sigmar, I don't know what that is, but this is cool, and reads it, they can enjoy it. They don't have to be like, wait, I have to go through and read 30 other books before this.
Right.
So.
So many people post on Reddit saying, like, what's the read order of Age of Sigmar? Like, that's just an absurd question. There is no order to be read. Yeah.
I had kind of a follow-up question. You said that you always keep in mind the fact that it might be the first book that somebody has read, and so you keep it approachable. But what was the first story that you wrote for GW? Because I know those orders can get messed up sometimes. And how do you feel that you have kind of matured into the role of being an author for Black Library? I mean, you don't entrust the titular novel of an edition to somebody that they don't think is doing the job well, right? So what has that progress been like for you?
It's been interesting. I mean, like I said, they gave me a lot of, like my first story was, the Necromunda one, and that was basically me pitching them a story. And pretty much since then, it's been them saying, we have an anthology, it's got this going on. Okay. We have an anthology, it's got this going on. Okay. We have a thing going on, like, in doing that. My first Age of Sigmar story was actually, I'm trying to remember this, because the name changed about 3 times. Blood and Guts or something like that. And it's like one of the most recent ones that came out, because I wrote it really early, and I think they just kind of didn't have a spot for it, and then so it just kind of, like, I sold it, and, it was just like, it'll come out sometime, and, and eventually it did. And so, that was, I did that. And then, like I said, I wrote Last Volari, and they liked it. And I think that was the big thing. They decided that based on that, that's why they decided to give me Skaventide, which, I feel.
So I'm going to have to apologize to Will and Aaron here, because, like, I'm really, really surprised that you said the first story that you wrote was from Of Blood and Guts.
Yeah.
Because to me, that is one of the most AOS stories. Because it demonstrates such a great understanding for the setting. Like, you've got such interesting characters on both sides, right? And you've got them around Anvilgard. It really feels like somebody who's settled into the setting when you read that story, because it's not even like, here's a bunch of humans and here's a bunch of humans. It's like, no, we're going to do this ragtag bunch of like all these different species, right? And then we're going to do this whole vampire thing going on with this like doll court. Like, it's such a unique idea. So do you think that, I guess, based on your explanation here, do you think that this is like a little bit of like Necromunda or 40K spilling into it? Or is it just like, oh, I get to kind of do what I want now? Like, which of those two would you say defines how you wrote that story?
I mean, like I said, I did a lot of research. I read a lot of Age of Sigmar things. I read a lot, like in the wiki, I read a lot of stories. And yeah, I mean, there is a certain, Games Workshop theme, like the whole grimdark, thing is there. But Age of Sigmar is kind of, is its own thing. And yeah, I mostly just I really try to focus on characters. The setting is important. It's hugely important in this, but I think if you have good characters in the setting is necessary, that if you can do that, then you can pull a lot off.
So this is coming from a guy who hasn't read Skaventide yet, because I, again, a purist and I follow the rules. So I don't know if this necessarily applies, but a patron of the show, Klaus M.A., was asking what was your process for getting in the mindset of Skaven? Did you find that you had to get in the mindset of Skaven at all for this story? And if you did you read any, what research did you do? What books did you read to sort of prepare yourself for the Skaven onslaught?
I did read some books, and I'm, of course, blanking on the name right now. They were Skaven books.
Skaveny Rat book.
Yeah. But yeah, I read some of the Skaven books that have been out and done. But one of the things that was a thing with this is when the editors, when we were going back and forth talking about like what they wanted, what I should be doing with this, is they were saying, like, do your research about the Skaven, but they wanted them to be darker in this one. They didn't want them to be that, like, there's the whole kind of fun, humorous, like, running around cowardly, but which I don't think they were upset with or anything, but they were like, they don't want that to just be the thing. They wanted, especially with the Skaventide, they wanted them to be a threat. They wanted them to be like, this is bad that they're here. So they wanted them, they're like, we want more of a scary horror Skaven. So that was one of the things I was working with that, instead of trying to make them seem more threatening, more, and a little different. And the nice thing about Skaven is that since there's so many of them and they're so big, so huge, and that I can say, okay, there's this group of Skaven that acts like this. And okay, there's billions of Skaven. There's going to be like every kind, like maybe not 90, but, there's going to be every kind of, like Skaven out there.
Sure.
So
would you have considered, actually, and Klaus kind of asked this, but would you have considered yourself a Skaven fan before you started writing this book? And do you find yourself a Skaven fan now?
Yeah, I always liked the Skaven. Like, I forgot one of the things we also played when I was in high school when we were going through things. We played a little Blood Bowl, and I had a Skaven team.
Ooh, nice.
And yeah, I like Skaven. This is one of these, like, so Games Workshop likes to make sure to tell the authors, like, like, make sure when you're doing interviews and things, not to say that you're representing the lore, that you are, like, this is how it actually works. But so in my mind, that's the caveat. Games Workshop. I always look at Skaven as being kind of the Tyranids of the fantasy setting. They are the weird horde creature that's coming in, and like they can sort of, like in game terms, they can be the horde, they can be the giant monsters, they can be the weapons guys, whatever. They're this sort of thing. And like I said, that's kind of my thought process in them, like looking at them. Except the Tyranids are this like one united mind whereas the Skaven are like, they want to be one united mind, except the one, whatever particular Skaven you're talking about wants to be the one in charge.
Yeah.
They are they are the high, whatever the opposite of a hive mind is, like, so
That's a fun way to look at it. Yeah, I mean, it's very antithetical. I mean, in execution is almost a similar vibe, but like the cause of is
right,
very, very much the opposite of it.
Yeah.
Another patron of the show, Chrisling, had a question. They ask, GW have focused on a boots on the ground perspective for 4th edition. I suppose that's up for debate. I agree with that, but not everybody else thinks that. Were you encouraged to do the same for the Skaventide novel? A more boots on the ground approach to the story?
I'm trying to wrap my head, like, what exactly you mean by boots on the ground. Like,
maybe it's low fantasy, maybe it's more perspective of the common man. And so you had mentioned that there's a mortal character. Were those either directives from GW or something that maybe you tried to generate yourself, or was that not even a consideration at all for this one?
It's probably a combination where they definitely wanted a story where this was seen as oh my God, terrible things are happening. We have to hold back what's going on, from the perspective of the Stormcast, and that. And the idea that, like, we went back and forth on the ending a few times, and the fact that, again, trying not to ruin things too much, that it's sort of like you managed to scrape out like a victory, but it's very much a uncertain, like how long is this going to last? Like how, this could all come down pretty soon. Like things are in a bad way. So I suppose in that way, like it's kind of a little less, the uncertainty of who's going to win is like part of Age of Sigmar and part of the setting. But it's very much, it was meant to be very much this is a struggle going on. This is not a resounding victory on any side. This is we squeaked that one out.
He gets it. He gets it.
But, we're in a bad, one of the last scenes is them looking out and seeing what's happened to the realms, like where the Skaven have broken through, and there's how bad it is, and going, oh, damn, this is not good. So.
That brings up a question that we didn't write down, but like knowing that you're writing a book for a massive event that's going to continue past the book, like what kind of freedom or limitations does that kind of put into how you write your story?
I mean, there's kind of that like anxiety of like, I hope I set this up right, and I hope it blends in with all the other stuff that's going on, because like I said, they're doing other things with the battle tome and that, and I'm like, I hope all this kind of fits together fairly well. But it is also really fun to be like I said, I got to kind of describe what this new land looks like. And it's like, oh, that's going to influence, hopefully.
Right.
There's always the possibility that people are like, yeah,
Right.
But it is a lot of fun to like start like seeing my work, like the things I've thought of, like kind of going into the mix.
Yeah.
A big melting pot, knowing that you contributed ingredients towards it, I imagine is probably rewarding.
A quick specific question: do you consider this more of a Skaventide, I should say, a horror novel, or is it more of like a gothic fiction? Like, what would you kind of describe it as?
I would say more gothic, but with some definite horror elements. Like I said, I tried to make these things kind of like the Skaven more upsetting, and we'll see. I know I've had friends who have read it when it came out, and like one of them that does not read horror was like, ugh, this is kind of upsetting. Like, like, well, okay.
You're like, thank you for the
I
cow.
was gonna say, what a validating statement. Yeah.
I'm wondering how my 12-year-old is gonna deal with reading it, or if he's going to finish it. So it's an interesting. Yeah, it definitely gripped me as a bit of a horror novel.
Yeah,
So.
yeah. I mean, there's definitely parts of it, which are, it's.
You've and this is just as an aside, you've written books like of blood and guts. There's memories of blood and sand. You write books about vampires. Do you want to write more like horror stories? I don't know. Does the horror imprint still exist anymore?
I think so. I mean, I think there's like 40K horror. I haven't written for them. I've written for the crime, but
Okay.
yeah. I mean, I like writing horror in my non Warhammer stuff. I've written some horror, and it's kind of fun. But yeah, just for the whole like writing scary stuff is can be really amusing sometimes.
Sure. I, for one, just read horror movie Wikipedia plot synopsises, and that's my exposure to horror. That's as close to horror as I get. But back to Skaventide, Aaron, you're breaking your own rules. Do you guys have other Skaventide questions that we should address?
So how much do you love Memorians now? And are they one of your favorite things in AOS? Because it really felt like that was a theme maybe in the novel.
I mean, I really like them. I mean, so again, they came out with these and they're like, oh, right. And then there's been these Memorian characters and they're just like these people that go along with these these guys and help them out and like write stuff down. I'm like, and they're just people. And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, so they just die all the time. And they're like, yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm like, awesome. One of my main characters is going to be one of these, and just like, I mean, I liked just having it, like I said, having this, I wanted to have a character that would come in and help explain, because even though I imagine a lot of the people that read this are going to be people who have read a lot of Age of Sigmar and that, like, this chamber, this is new. And the Reclusians, and that I want, so I had to sort of say, what's up with these people? So here's this new person coming in, and having them come in and like having them, I love writing the scene where they sort of find out what a Memorian does, and that like, wait, we're supposed to go into battle with the demigods? Yeah. We're just going to die horribly. We'll try not to have that. Thanks.
That wouldn't be great.
Great.
No, please.
Thank you.
I will say from the gameplay perspective, seeing the tiny little dude next to the big Stormcast is just such a funny image. And then, yeah, they die immediately. It's very sad.
And I'm not going to go into it because like, this is one of the things, but I kind of had like, my reasoning in the book of like why they have to be there, why they have to be in the fight. And yeah, so, but yeah, it's kind of this, again, kind of the grimdark, like, well, here's the thing. We really need you guys to help out. So put on this helmet and go march behind the demigod and like just
keep your head down.
When you see the demon, just hit the ground and
play dead. Yeah, roll over. That's fun. Any other Skaventide questions, or if not, Gary, I'll give you a chance to give us your final thoughts. Anything else you want to say about the book? Your sales pitch, if necessary.
Like I said, I mean, I think if you want to, like the sort of next chapter of Age of Sigmar, this is kind of helping introduce it. And I mean, I don't want to scare people off too much. It's not all horror. It's not all like, but yeah, there is some dark elements there. So,
okay.
Sorry, I'm going to have a stronger pitch for you, Gary. If you want to look at the models and go, those are cool models. And then if you want to be like, but why do I care about them? Read Skaventide, because you will care about those models by the end of the book. I guarantee you.
Mm-hmm.
Besides all the money you spent on buying them, of course.
Yeah.
Money well spent, GW, of course.
Always.
I've got the box right there. All right. So in that case, I'm trying to think. We answered a couple other questions that we've got listed here, so we don't need to rehash them. Maybe we'll just dive into some more listener questions, because, again, they're more creative than we are. I've got one from SageMut14. They ask, which major character would you want to be the primary Black Library author for? Before you answer, I'm going to try and refresh myself. Have you written for pre-established Age of Sigmar characters already? I think you did a Black Talon story, maybe?
Yeah,
I'm trying to think if you've done any others.
That's the one that I've done. I've done one Black Talon story where I did Rodus.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Rostus?
Rostus, thank you.
There you go.
Yes. My terrible...
Man,
I'm bad.
I'm showing off tonight. I'm doing great. Yeah.
When it's sort of like, remember the 6 million characters written. Oh, God.
Yeah. But given that, then, are there any major characters in the setting that either you just want to write for or about, or someone that you want to like own, like be the guy for whoever it is? Yeah.
That is kind of one of the things where I do like making up my own characters. That's one of the things where, like when you were asking the question about like, going from a model, like I don't mind going from a physical description that gives me some things, but I like making the character, like their personality in that, So I do like doing that. But we'll see, if they ask me at some point to write, one of these.
Sure. Just as a segue, because you mentioned that, do you think you'll ever go back to like pitching things, or are you on the they're going to tell me what they want track for the foreseeable future?
Right now, it seems to be they keep bringing things up before, like, I'm always like, well, if they don't ask me like to do something for a while, then, but it's right now, it really seems like I hand something in. They're like, great, by the way, here's this other thing.
Well, I've got it. Yeah, sure.
So and that's not a horrible thing,
True.
So.
I mean, I suppose I got to ask, if we're on this train of thought, do you have a pitch in your back pocket that you're just waiting to propose that you just haven't had time to bring up yet?
I have one that I'd like to mess with, but you won't like it because it's not Age of Sigmar, it's Warhammer 40K. So
I'm stifling my boo. I'm keeping it down inside of me right now.
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Well, I'll tell you what. Because our listener, it won't spoil anything for the listeners if you can't even give the highest level view of it. Because this is an Age of Sigmar podcast, it's probably fine if you want to, and you don't have to.
The first story I did for them, the Necromunda stories, Warhammer 40K, I really like the characters, and I'd love to sort of keep going with them and do kind of a like them dealing with like the rest of the 40K universe, or at least part of it, But that's one of the things. It's the, I like doing a lot of different things. I don't mind them saying, hey, you want to try this project? Because then I can sit there and figure out, okay, what can I do with this? What can I do? It's this fun puzzle of like, what kind of characters can I use in this?
I guess we could maybe cut this in earlier, but we never did our listener question pitch to demand that they...
Oh, okay. I mean, we can do that now. Everyone's favorite part of the show. I don't know if you've ever listened, but hey, guys, we've been asking listener questions, listeners. And if you are thinking to yourself, hey, man, I would love to get my question on the show, but how do I do that? I'll tell you how, dear listener, is you hang out in our Discord, which can be found at www.themortalrealms.com/Discord. And you just, basically live there. Set up a tent, keep the weather off of you, and just all day, every day. You're probably going to have to quit your job. That's the price you're going to have to pay to wait for, I don't know, whenever I feel like asking, hey, we're going to ask questions on a show, just like this show. And then you'll ask your question, and then I'll copy and paste it into a document, and I'll ask them. So is that what you meant, Will? Because there it is.
Exactly.
Nice.
And then a listener question I had that may be related to Skaventide, coming from Sage Mutt, is what is your favorite storm host?
I probably like, I'm not sure. I mostly pretty much just done the Hallowed Knights, and I like them, so far.
Yeah.
I also had fun. The Night Questor, this was an Astral Templar, and that was fun, because I like them too. I don't have a huge this one, that one,
right.
Wonderful. All right. So the question is from our patron, Chrisling. So Graz Gutsmart and a Son of the Vampire are a great unlikely partnership. Will we see more of them in the future? And also, did you have ideas for other mismatched pairings in the Mortal Realms you would like to write about?
Twofer.
There are definitely somebody now I can go back when you said like, oh, would you like to do like your own stuff or pitch for your thing like Age of Sigmar? Yeah, I would like to actually do more of them.
Okay.
I think in some ways it may be a little tough because I'm already doing like a lot of vampire stuff with Nissa, so it's like, oh, more vampires, but I can be the vampire guy. That's fine. But yeah, I really like doing them. I like them as a pair, the ogre and the tiny vampire. Let's see, the other like mismatched. I did with the Perfect Assassin. I did that, the doing the elf assassin and doing the berserk dwarf. That was an interesting one because I pretty much they asked me about that. Oh, we wanted a story, and they're like, would you like to do a Gotrek story? And I'm like, that one I kind of freaked out about because I was just like, I don't know if I know, like that's such a big part of the lore, and I read some of his stories, but not nearly all of them. And I was just like, and I just sidestepped it and went like, I'll do his companion,
Yeah.
And it was a lot of fun, and it was kind of fun having him there, just being that like his whole point in that story was just like being a lump that like was annoying her, but yeah, I mean, having things like that, having the pairings that like work off of each other, that's kind of a fun way to write. I do like doing that. So
very cool. Writing a Gotrek story, I feel like it's well, not every Black Library author, because not everyone gets a chance to do so, but it's kind of like a rite of passage, right? Like you got to get through your Gotrek story, reach the, I don't know, upper echelons. Question from Fredericks. I feel like we could have asked this probably at other places before because we've touched on this topic, but I'll ask it now. They ask, how do you imagine living normal lives in these constantly war-torn realms? Kind of related to our boots on the ground, our grounded story situation. How do you envision how someone might survive in these war-torn realms, and what's that life look like?
That's the thing. I did a little bit of that with the Last Volari and a little bit of that with Skaventide, in that, like I said, with the Volari story, there is the whole idea of them having this war there. And one of the other viewpoint characters was one of the person leading, the mortal forces against the vampires, and talking about like them living in this town and trying to recruit like the random like people out of the town. Like, you're part of our group now, it's the, and, like talk about the various villages that are being overrun by this war going back and forth. I mean, what I would imagine is that, people just live, you do what you can and you survive how you can. Like this Skaventide, I have this setting at this giant wall on this mountain pass, and there are these guards that are there like watching it. But, I describe a little bit that there's the ruins of this city behind it, and there's people living there in this little village because they grow vegetables and sell it to the soldiers. And that's just what they do, and it's fine. And that's how they live their lives. And they have a nice little life there until, something awful happens, and
no, what are the chances?
Nah.
But, they had generations living there, and it was fine.
And will continue thusly.
Yeah.
Sure. What kind of hobbies do you have outside of writing, and how do these hobbies influence your writing? I know you talked about a lot of the games that you had done before. Other hobbies, or those hobbies that still sort of stick with you?
I did a lot of role playing in college, and then I've tried to hang on to it through as I've gotten older. I've done a lot of martial arts. I started that in college and kept going through. That was a lot of fun. As I've gotten older, it's gotten a little harder. Go out there and wrestle with 20-year-olds. But it is a good way to keep in shape. Writing and reading take up a lot of time. And one of the unfortunate aspects of writing is that it's really important to keep up on your reading so that you stay current on what's going on, and you're seeing what other people are doing and what cool stuff, really helps hone your thing. But it gets tough because you're writing all this time, and then now it's like, okay, now go read. And then then you're you have like, I'm part of a couple of writing groups, so I'm reading a lot of stuff that they're putting out and critiquing it, and so. But I still try to keep up with it.
Sure. What do you find yourself reading if you have the chance to do so? Outside of the Warhammer universe, do you get a chance to read for pleasure, I suppose? So what kind of stuff are you reading or listening to these days?
I do a lot of I try to be go outside the Warhammer universe, yes. But I kind of stick with the sci-fi fantasy thing, but that's been a lifelong thing, like that's my niche. And horror, I kind of blend the speculative fiction. Right now I'm reading Wintertide by Ruthanna Emrys, which is a Lovecraft kind of takeoff, which is really good. I had a spate of horror before that.
Okay. Are you finding time to write outside the Warhammer universe as well at all, or is Warhammer sort of eating up all your writing time?
I'm trying to. Like I said, the one kind of like, it's really nice that they keep coming up for projects for me, but it's also kind of like, and real life has been like eating up a lot of time. Also, I go back a little bit to the I mentioned earlier, like when I was first starting to write and my wife was in the hospital, and I said, oh yeah, that might be that's kind of a recurring theme. So I was writing, I started Skaventide, and I was about maybe, we'd worked out all of the stuff, and I'd started in, I was maybe like a month into it, writing. And my wife came to me and said, oh, by the way, I had some medical tests. I mean, she did this in a much nicer, better way. But just like, by the way, I have ovarian cancer. I'm like, oh,
no.
Oh, no.
I'm sorry to hear
that. Pretty much the whole time I was writing that, I was like, we were dealing with that. And so I was like, like part of that book got written in like chemotherapy labs and things. Now, again, she came through. She's cancer free now, doing really good.
Awesome. That's fantastic.
Yeah. So, but yeah, that was a thing. Like I'm trying to like keep up on stuff, and it's sort of like, what did you do like last year? Well, I wrote a book, and my wife had cancer, and that was about it.
Is that not enough?
Yeah.
Anonymous asker, huh? Is that not enough?
Yeah. So.
Get this. Guess how many books I wrote last year? 0 books.
Right.
This may be a personal question, but like, do you feel like one of the characters helped you to process that health scare, as it were, right? And in Skaventide, or is that not? Are you completely divorced from that when you're writing?
It ended up like, it wasn't so much the processing, but I think some of the horror elements, and the people that have read Skaventide will notice that there's some body horror stuff of people having their body taken over and destroyed, and it's sort of like, well, like, where did that come from? So, sometimes you're not sure where these ideas come from. Sometimes it's like, well,
sure, man, that's a scoop for the podcast, right? That probably doesn't come out all that much.
I kind of had a follow-up question. Does your passion for martial arts affect what clan you chose to feature in Skaventide?
Maybe.
I haven't read it, and I don't know what that means.
You'll find out.
I can't wait.
I figure you could guess.
I guess I could maybe assume, which makes me all the more excited to read it. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna rattle off a couple more. First things first. Which of your characters would you most like to see made into a model? I know that doesn't always happen, but like wishful thinking. If you had to pick one of your characters that could be a model, which one would you pick?
Probably Nissa, because that's that's kind of my first book, my first big character from the book, So,
well, and the pose on the cover of that book just lends itself perfectly to just take that and make it a model.
I gotta look at it again.
I love that cover. That was so good.
So good.
That's a model pose.
Question.
Yeah.
Is that the first time you've had a piece of art done for one of your books?
No, I did. So years back, I did a book for Pathfinder, the role-playing game.
Yay!
Oh yeah, nice.
So they did a cover for that, and so that would be the first. And actually, my very first short story sale was to Writers of the Future. And which is kind of a contest for new writers. And when you do that, they do illustrators too. And they did an illustration for the story. So I suppose technically that was my first. So
sure, a big milestone, if I imagine.
Were you able to provide any feedback? And do you feel like you've grown in the ability to provide feedback for covers? Or was it like, draw a vampire and she's female and she's a teenager, 100 years old, go have fun?
No. She's got 2 cool swords.
Yeah. I have not. I mean, they asked me a little bit for the Last Volari. They were kind of like, well, like, do you have any suggestions? And I'm just like, well, you've seen the description, and yeah, I kind of did that. And not a huge amount. And then they were just like, well, here's the cover. And I'm like, that's fantastic.
Got it in one. She's even got her tactical rock that she's standing on.
Yeah.
Perfect. You know how models work. Yeah. Similar to my character made into a model question. This is my favorite question, which is to say, if you had to contribute a character to a Mortal Realms or Age of Sigmar Avengers, who would be on the Avengers team?
That's tougher. I mean, it kind of depends, because it's sort of like, in some ways I'm tempted to say Aemon, the Night Quester, basically because he'd hate being on that team.
Right.
I think he'd be fun. Like he'd be the Batman character on like, like to go to a different place, but like where it's sort of like we have to go do this all together. Where'd he go? Like I already took care of the problem. It's done.
Okay, I like that. Good. Yeah. It's a different answer. And then I ask this question and I never get a compelling response from anybody because they have to stay tight-lipped. Yeah. You'll probably have to be tight-lipped too, but I'll ask it anyways because I can't stop myself. But I'd love to know what's next for you, and define that any way that you want to.
I am still doing stuff for a Games Workshop. I'm doing some stuff for Mortal Realms, so that should be coming out like sometime.
Brass book, got it.
Yes, exactly. Nothing but like.
Okay, cool. I feel like that's all we can ever. That's all anyone is ever allowed to say. So that's fine. Knowing that you still are though is reassuring. Yeah. Okay, cool.
Apparently, they liked it. So the stuff so far. So.
Hey, perfect.
I do have a question for you guys.
Oh, question for us.
Well, he's got a question for us though.
It's the thing of any of you guys going to Gen Con? So.
No, I wish.
No, unfortunately not.
Oh, well.
I wish. Yeah.
Is it still in Indiana?
Yeah.
Right. It didn't move, did it?
Minneapolis. So
okay.
I'm going because it's 2 hours away from me. So
Sure.
Right. Yeah.
I'm actually doing.
We all ended up going to a Adepticon, but that it's in Milwaukee this year now, so it's even closer.
Further away.
Right. But I still want to I'm trying to talk to Games Workshop. I'm like, do you do anything with the authors at this stuff? And they're like, eh. And I'm just like,
right.
Don't they not even do Black Library events in England anymore? I thought they did them for a while, and I thought they maybe stopped.
No, they? Okay. I feel sometimes a little like, oh, they're doing something over there.
At a distance.
Someday I will go over and visit.
Sure.
But yeah.
Have you had a chance to go visit?
I have not. No, I've never been to England, so. I've done lots of travel around the U.S., but very little foreign travel. So, and I really want to, but.
Sure.
Yeah.
Have you been told that any of your writing was not British enough?
My problem so far, like I haven't really heard oh, this is too American, so that's good. Except
that's good.
For pants. Last Volari had some scene where she she's something about her pants, and they're like, no. I'm like, what? It's like you're saying she's walking around in her underwear. I'm like, oh. Okay. No.
Do you write with British spellings, or do you write with your spellings and then they write them on their
British
side?
Spellings, although I've learned that I can set Microsoft to you
to be British. Okay.
And it is really weird because you talk about writing my own stuff, because I'm writing for them, and then I'll try to write my own things, and I'm like, all these things,
Yeah. That's funny.
Putting all the U's in things,
Sure. Okay. Any other questions before we ramble out of here? All right. Well, in that case, that'll be the end of our questions thus far. But hey, Gary, thank you so very, very much for chatting with us. I think it's been a pleasure.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
honestly, my opinion is the only one that matters. So,
Yeah.
two
I'm
thumbs
sure
up.
post you will express the fact that I couldn't remember anyone's name for anything.
No one will ever know.
Just Gotrick.
Yeah, they'd
For
be
sure.
like, "Oh yes, I liked writing about Gothrak." You know,
I never got more feedback about an episode than when I started splicing words that other people had said into the middle of my episode. People eat that nonsense up. Is there? Let me ask. How can folks get a hold of you? How can folks find you? Where's your presence on the internet? How can they get closer to Gary Kloster?
my probably the easiest. I have a minimal. Like I'm there. I'm also on. I'm on Blue Sky, but I don't post much. I mostly just lurk.
Yeah.
Same.
Yeah.
Ditto.
I used to be on Twitter, but that got weird. So
Yeah.
It's weird times for self promotion at this point.
yeah, it was really annoying too, because I was just starting to get some traction on Twitter where people were, because like my Black Library stuff was coming out and people were starting to follow me and be like, and I'm like, okay, good. And then things got weird. And I was just like, I'm going to go over to Blue Sky and sulk, like.
Look my ones. All right. Well, excellent. Again, thank you very much. Listeners, check out Skaventide.
If it makes me feel any better, I haven't even gotten my copy yet. It's supposed to come tomorrow. So.
Oh gosh.
Nice.
Oh.
I hope it's gold filigreed. All right. So, listeners, check out Skaventide. It's out. It's on. I can say this now on this episode. It's out. It's for sale now. So wherever Black Library books are sold. And I suppose we can do my regular outro as well. So get ready, team. It's time for our reforging. But Sigmar willing, we'll be back soon. Like, subscribe, share, or leave a review. Join us on Discord. Drop a tip on our Patreon. Anything you can do will spread the word of Sigmar farther than we can on our own. Chat with us anytime about your thoughts on Twitter, despite our weird feelings about it. You can find us at The Mortal Realms. Hey, Paul, where can they find you online?
At PJ Shard.
Hey, well, where can they find you on the internet?
You can find me lurking on Blue Sky at Sever.
And I'm Aaron. You can find me at Dos Esos at most places, and you can find all our Mortal Realms shows and content at www.themortalrealms. Wait, did I only do two W's? www.themortalrealms.com. That would have been confusing. People wouldn't have been able to find it.
That's not working.
In the Last Volari, the Volari are shown to this is long. Okay, the Volari are shown to believe they control the Broken Plains. In previous works in Age of Sigmar, such as Volturung Road and the Fireslayer's Battle Tome, that the Volturung and many of their Scion lodges live in the Broken Plains among mountains such as Firespike Mountains. Is the implication that the Volturung have been ousted from their nations, or that the Volari are unaware of them?
The implication here is that there are multiple Broken Plains.
Okay.
Awesome. Yes.
Take that, Sigma.
I mean, yeah.
No,
That's what you.
I mean, this is, because I was not trying to. This is a thing where I'm saying the lore is so big. It's like, did I know that there was another Broken Plains? No, I did not. So this is another place that happens to have that same name,
Sure.
And
all right.
So.
And he'll understand that. He's the guy who you talk about wikis. I think at the beginning of the episode, like he manages the Lexicanum wiki, and so like he asked these questions so we can so we can put them in the wiki somewhere. I used
that, and I was also, I was doing some research on there like not too long ago, and something with vampires came up, and there was like this thing, and I'm like, oh, what's this about this? And I'm like, wait, this is familiar. Oh, it's from my book.
He cited me.
Wait a second.
Sure.
Weird, where's this lore coming from? Oh.
Whoever wrote this is doing a really good job.
Yeah, I imagine that must be such a fun discovery. I love that. That's great. Another one. So he'd asked, are the Graz in Last Volari meant to be ghouls or an unrelated strain of mutated human? If they are ghouls, what allows the Volari and their allies to feed on them without succumbing to delusion? So are they ghouls?
I would say right now that were like when I was writing them, the intention was to kind of just be this unrelated strain, not much ghouls, but things aren't settled there. Like I said, the lore there is like, I just made something up and we'll see. What serves the story later on is kind of the big thing.
Yeah.
You know.
True. Well, and we'll find out more in the next Graz novel.
The
so.
all grass novel. Yeah.
All grass.
All the time. And then the last one that he had throughout. This one I don't even understand all that much, but I'm going to say that I asked it. Throughout the setting, narcotics such as the dun root you introduce in Skaventide, and alcohol are commonly imbibed by citizens. Would there be, in your opinion, less dangerous substance abuses in the setting, such as caffeine through soda or coffee?
Probably, I'm sure. You know, like, it's nothing that's come up with anything. There's so much stuff you don't want to be like, but there has to be some kind of tea. There's always tea.
There have to be.
You know,
yeah.
So,
Sure.
and the minute somebody finds something with caffeine in it,
Yeah.
Right.
I love that in 40K they have recaf, but no tea. Just like, come on, like it's quintessential British property, and you don't even have tea. What is this coming from?
maybe that's
I like
the
that.
whole nightmarish future. Is like,
Yeah, exactly.
I like that Sage Mode understands the game a little bit, where he had to ask, "Would there be, in your opinion?" Because he knows that you're not allowed to make blanket statements for GW's behalf. You had to.
I don't want to. I don't want to weigh in on the caffeine.
Yeah.
Sure.